You know that feeling when you finally sit down to rest? The day is over, nothing urgent is happening, and by every measure, you should feel fine, but your body refuses to believe it? There's this low hum of unease, a restlessness you can't quite name. You check your phone for no reason. You replay a conversation from 3 days ago. You feel vaguely guilty for not doing more, even though you've already done enough. You're not anxious about anything specific. You're just on. Most people chalk this up to personality. I'm a worrier. I've always been like this. That's just how I am. And they move on, carrying this constant background noise as though it's simply the price of being them. But here's what almost no one tells you. That hum isn't a character flaw. It isn't weakness. It isn't even anxiety in the clinical sense, at least not always. What it often is a nervous system that learned, somewhere along the way, that safety is not something you get to feel for very long. What we're really talking about is a brain that never quite got the signal that the threat is over. Psychologists and neuroscientists have a term for this state. They call it chronic activation of the threat response system, though you might know it more colloquially as survival mode. The problem is that most conversations about this concept focus on dramatic trauma, war, disaster, acute crisis. And while those experiences absolutely activate this state, they're not the only way a brain learns to live there. In fact, the quieter roads into survival mode are far more common and far less recognized. Here's what the research actually shows. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, functions essentially as your internal threat detector. When it perceives danger, it signals the body to mobilize, heart rate up, muscles primed, attention narrowed. This is the famous fight or flight response, and it's extraordinarily good at keeping you alive in moments of genuine danger. The challenge is that the amygdala doesn't distinguish particularly well between a lion and a difficult conversation, between physical threat and social rejection, between someone raising their voice at you and someone raising their voice in a movie you're watching. It responds to perceived threat, and it learns from experience what kinds of things are threatening. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux spent decades mapping this system, and one of his most striking findings was how sticky these threat associations are. The brain forms them quickly, reinforces them with repetition, and holds on to them tenaciously, because from a survival standpoint, it is far safer to over-detect threat than to miss one. So when a person grows up in an environment where unpredictability was normal, where love felt conditional, where conflict was frequent, where they had to stay attuned to the emotional weather of the room just to feel safe, the amygdala doesn't simply forget that when circumstances change. It adapted. It became calibrated for a high-threat environment, and it keeps running that calibration long after the environment has shifted. This is important to understand. Survival mode is not a dysfunction. It was a solution, a remarkably intelligent, efficient solution to a genuinely difficult set of circumstances. The nervous system did what nervous systems do. It learned, it adapted, and it prepared the person to navigate the world they actually lived in. And this is true across a wide spectrum of experience, not only for people who experienced what we'd formally classify as trauma. Research on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, shows that even subtler forms of chronic stress, emotional inconsistency, high parental conflict, growing up in economic instability, being in environments where you felt consistently overlooked or misunderstood, can orient the nervous system toward ongoing vigilance. The body doesn't require a single catastrophic event. It requires only a pattern. And patterns, repeated often enough, become the baseline. It's also worth saying clearly, none of this is about blame. The people who created these environments were often running their own survival programming, inherited from their own histories. This is not a story about who did what to whom. It's a story about how adaptation works, passed quietly from nervous system to nervous system, generation to generation. Now, here is where it gets genuinely interesting and perhaps a little uncomfortable to sit with. Many of the traits that survival mode produces are, in certain contexts, genuine strengths. Hypervigilance, the constant scanning for threat, also makes people remarkably perceptive. They notice things others miss. They read emotional subtlety with unusual accuracy. They are often the first to sense when something in a relationship or a situation is off. People who learned to manage their environment by staying attuned to others often develop a kind of emotional intelligence that is, in many professional and relational contexts, an extraordinary asset. The paradox is that the very adaptation that creates the exhaustion creates the capacity. The same sensitivity that makes it hard to relax in a quiet room is the sensitivity that makes someone a gifted therapist, a perceptive friend, a leader who actually notices when their team is struggling. This doesn't mean the cost isn't real. It is. Living in ongoing activation is physically taxing. The immune system, the cardiovascular system, sleep quality, digestion, all of these are affected by chronic stress hormones. The relationships built from a place of chronic vigilance often carry a particular kind of loneliness, because even when love and safety are genuinely present, the nervous system keeps asking, but for how long? And perhaps the quietest cost of all, the difficulty of simply inhabiting a moment, of letting rest be rest, of receiving good things without immediately calculating how they might be taken away. If any of this is landing somewhere real for you, it may be worth knowing that the nervous system is not a fixed thing. Polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, describes how the autonomic nervous system is constantly in dialogue with the environment, with the body, with other nervous systems. And crucially, it describes how safety can be learned and communicated to a system that has been organized around threat. Not through willpower or positive thinking, but through the slow, patient accumulation of experiences that tell a different story than the one the amygdala has been holding on to. This is not something that happens quickly, and it is not something that you can think your way through, but it is possible. The nervous system that learned survival mode learned it through experience, and it can, with time and the right conditions, begin to learn something else. You are not broken. You are not uniquely defective. You are a person whose system learned to stay ready, and that readiness served a real purpose, even if it has long since outlasted the circumstances that created it. If this particular piece of the picture resonated with you, there may be more worth exploring, specifically the ways survival mode shapes not just how we feel, but how we connect, how we choose, and what we unconsciously expect from the people closest to us. That thread runs deeper than most people realize, and it tends to explain a great deal.